You have never been truly alone. Not once. Not really. Even right now, in whatever room you are sitting in, something is watching. A camera in the corner of a store, a phone tracking your location, an algorithm quietly guessing what you will want to buy next Tuesday. You have gotten used to it. You have built an entire life around small pockets of solitude carved out of a world that never stops looking. A locked door, a pair of headphones. The 5 seconds you spend pretending not to be home when someone knocks. Here is the question nobody asks. Where did this need come from? Rewind 200,000 years. Strip away the walls, the doors, the Wi-Fi passwords. You are standing in a small band of humans, maybe 20 of them, maybe 40, moving together across a landscape that does not belong to anyone. There is no house. There is no room that is yours and only yours. You eat where everyone eats. You sleep where everyone sleeps. Your breath mixes with theirs around the same fire, night after night, for your entire life. Try to sit with that. Not a weekend camping trip, a permanent, lifelong condition. From birth to death, you are never unseen. Archaeologists have dug through hundreds of these ancient camps looking for something specific. A separated sleeping nook, a partition, a wall of branches marking off one person's space from another's. They almost never find it. The shelter is one shared shell, and everyone piles in together like puppies in a basket. So did these people simply not need privacy? Or did they invent something else instead? Something that never shows up in the dirt because it never had a physical shape? The answer is the second one, and it is stranger than you'd expect. Long before anyone built a door, humans built an agreement, an invisible rule everyone silently obeyed. If someone turned away to cry, you did not ask why. If a couple argued in a hushed voice by the fire's edge, you let your eyes drift elsewhere. Anthropologists have a name for this now: civil inattention, the art of seeing everything and admitting to nothing. It sounds polite. It was closer to survival. In a group of 40 people who depend on each other for food, defense, and warmth, prying into someone's business could tear the whole structure apart. So, privacy did not live in a room. It lived in the discipline of other people's eyes. Then everything changed, and it happened underground, in the soil itself. Somewhere between 10 and 12,000 years ago, in scattered pockets across the planet, humans stopped wandering. They planted seeds. They waited. And for the first time in the history of the species, they had something worth guarding. A harvest that could be stolen, a herd that could wander off, a store of grain that could mean the difference between surviving winter and starving through it. This is the moment privacy stopped being just a social habit and started becoming architecture. Walk through the ruins of Çatalhöyük, a 9,000-year-old settlement in what is now Turkey, and you find something almost claustrophobic. Houses packed shoulder to shoulder with no streets between them. People climbing down ladders through holes in their own roofs just to get inside. And yet, inside those cramped mud brick boxes, something new is happening. A raised platform for sleeping, a separate corner for cooking, a designated space for storage. The home was no longer just shelter from rain. It was becoming a container for a life, deliberately organized, deliberately divided. There is a psychologist named Erwin Altman who spent decades studying exactly this shift, and he proposed something that reframes the entire story. Privacy, he argued, was never really about being alone. It was about control, the ability to open and close a boundary depending on what you needed at that moment. Sometimes you want company. Sometimes you want solitude. Privacy is the mechanism that lets you choose. Çatalhöyük is Altman's theory carved into mud brick, 4,000 years before he was born to describe it. But notice who was left out of this new architecture: children. In these early farming villages, Kids slept in the same room as their parents and siblings, absorbing every argument, every illness, every private moment of adult life with no filter at all. Nobody considered this strange. There simply was not enough space to think otherwise. So children found privacy somewhere the walls couldn't reach. In time, not space. The hour spent alone fetching water, the stretch of afternoon tending goats on a hillside, a single tree that became, in a child's mind, an entire kingdom no one else could enter. Movement itself became a doorway into the self. Bodies, meanwhile, stayed stubbornly public for thousands of years afterward. Walk into a Roman public latrine and you'd find long stone benches with holes, cut side by side over a channel of running water. No walls, no partitions, just neighbors chatting mid-business the way you might chat over a fence today. The Romans weren't embarrassed by this. They were proud of it. Sanitation was civilization, and civilization was meant to be witnessed. Only the wealthy escaped it, tucking private chamber pots into their villas while everyone else sat in full view of the street. Even then, privacy had a price tag, and only some people could afford to pay it. Egypt is where privacy stops being an accident of geography and starts becoming a statement of power. For an ordinary Egyptian family, home was one or two mud brick rooms shared by everyone, and privacy remained what it had always been, a behavior, not a wall. But step into the household of a noble, a priest, a high official, and the picture flips entirely. Multiple rooms, a reception hall for guests, sealed off from the family's private quarters. Spaces a visitor would never see, no matter how important they were. By roughly 3,000 years before this video reached your screen, some humans weren't just wishing for privacy. They were building entire systems of rooms and thresholds to manufacture it on command. And the Egyptians didn't stop at the boundary of life itself. They called the tomb Pergiet, the house of eternity, and they sealed it shut with the same intention a noble sealed off his private chambers from a stranger's eyes. If privacy was worth having in life, they reasoned, it was worth taking with you into death. Few civilizations have ever wanted solitude quite that badly. Meanwhile, in the river valleys of Mesopotamia, cities were swelling to a size the human brain had never had to process before. Uruk may have held 50,000 people by 3000 BCE, an almost incomprehensible crowd for the ancient world. And crowding like that creates friction. It creates theft. It creates the need for rules. The Code of Hammurabi, carved around 1754 BCE, spells out property boundaries and the protection of the home from intrusion in startling detail. Breaking into someone's house was not treated as a minor offense. The punishment was execution on the spot, and the body was buried inside the very wall the thief had tried to breach. 4,000 years ago, a stranger's unwanted step through your doorway was already considered one of the gravest violations imaginable. Then there's Greece, which loved privacy and punished it in the same breath, depending entirely on who you were. Public life in Athens revolved around the agora, the central square where politics, philosophy, and gossip all collided in full view of everyone. To be seen there was to matter. Visibility was currency. But step behind the walls of the oikos, the household, and the story splits in two depending on gender. A citizen man moved freely between both worlds, debating in public and retreating in private whenever he chose. A woman, particularly in Athens, was expected to remain inside that private sphere almost entirely, not by her own choice but by social enforcement. The Greek word for the private realm was idion, the root of our modern word idiot, because to the Greek mind, a person confined only to private life, cut off from public participation, wasn't protected. They were diminished. Privacy in this world was a double-edged gift, precious in small doses and a quiet punishment when forced upon you completely. Travel east into the Zhou dynasty and the Warring States period of ancient China, and you find one of the most sophisticated philosophies of private life the ancient world ever produced. Confucian thought built an entire framework called Lai, ritual propriety, a kind of invisible script dictating exactly how to behave with a superior, a stranger, a father, a friend. Every public interaction was, in a very real sense, a performance with a fixed choreography, but Confucian thinkers understood something crucial. Performance is exhausting, and no one can sustain it forever. The home was where that script was allowed to drop. The relationship between husband and wife, parent and child, was held to an entirely different standard than public conduct, protected precisely because authenticity cannot survive constant observation. This is a strikingly modern idea wrapped in language that is 2,500 years old. The self you show the world and the self you actually are cannot be the same self all the time, and the space in between the two is where privacy actually lives. Rome pushed this idea into architecture with astonishing precision. The elite Roman home, the domus, was built almost like a set of concentric rings. The front rooms, the atrium and tablinum, were semi-public stages where clients arrived each morning to pay respects to their patron, a ritual the poet Martial complained about bitterly, grumbling about dragging himself out of bed at dawn to smile at people he'd rather avoid. But further back, past invisible social walls stronger than any physical one, sat the cubiculum, the bedroom, and the hortus, the private garden, spaces reserved only for family and true intimates. Roman law even enshrined this boundary in a phrase that predates the English, "An Englishman's home is his castle" by 1,000 years. Your home was your safest refuge, sacred by definition. The sociologist Irving Goffman would later describe this exact split as front stage and backstage behavior, the polished performance versus the unscripted self behind the curtain. Rome lived that theory in stone 18 centuries before Goffman put a name to it. You can see it most clearly in the letters of Cicero to his friend Atticus, letters he explicitly asked never be shown to anyone else. In them, the man history remembers as a towering, confident orator reveals himself as anxious, grieving, and riddled with self-doubt. Two men lived in that one body. The Cicero the Senate saw, and the Cicero only a sealed letter ever met. Some ancient people took the opposite extreme entirely. Centuries later, the Christian desert fathers and medieval anchorites had themselves voluntarily sealed inside small stone cells, sometimes for life, choosing total solitude as the ultimate spiritual pursuit. If privacy was a luxury for nobles and a legal right for homeowners, for these men and women it became something closer to devotion, and that is the thread running underneath all of it. Hunter-gatherers had behavioral privacy. Farmers built spatial privacy. Empires wrote it into law. But privacy was never handed out equally. The wealthy built walls around it. Women were often denied it while men claimed it freely. Enslaved people in Rome and everywhere else had almost none of it at all, sleeping in corridors and workspaces, permanently visible, permanently available. So the next time you close a door, put on headphones, or simply sit alone for 3 unnecessary minutes, understand what you're actually doing. You are finishing a conversation that started around a fire tens of thousands of years ago, when someone looked at the 29 other people they shared everything with and thought, just give me a minute.